Hello and welcome to MAGA, the podcast. Our mission is to show how Don the Con bamboozled our nation. Our goal is to help make sure the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028. We want to stop it before MAGA becomes unstoppable and our democracy further decays into a dictatorship. If we want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it began and why it spread. Now, we're not your racist uncles, MAGA. Our MAGA stands for I'm an Angry Asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. And I am your host, the Disgusted American. In our last episode, we explored how Trump's minions, Bondi, Blanche, Martin, and Bove, corrupted the Justice Department by firing apolitical career prosecutors and replacing them with Trump's personal attorneys who are loyal to him, not the Constitution. We can see how far they've fallen by the vindictive actions they took against their fellow lawyers. Department of Justice is now whitewashing history by trying to paint those prosecutors as witch hunters instead of guardians of the Constitution. Examples of this purge include Jack Smith, January 6 special counsel, Erez Ruvani, who refused to defy a judge's order, and Liz Oyer, who didn't want to give a gun permit to Looney Tune and domestic abuser Mel Gibson. They were all fired ultimately for being loyal to the Constitution. This week, in our last episode on the fall of the Department of Justice, we're going to take a look at what happens when hacks and minions take control and the Mad Emperor calls for the heads of his enemies and critics. Trump 2.0 was not just happy with investigations and allegations. So Trump started to apply pressure on the DOJ via social media for indictments. He complained to Pam Bondi about inaction, claiming that there's a great case and demanding on Truth Social that justice be served. But at the end of the day, Trump's not interested in the Constitution. He's interested in vengeance, not law.
I'll tell you, I'm not surprised at all. And I think it's just more of sort of the same nonsense that we've seen out of the administration, whether they're pressuring networks, pressuring law firms, and now you're seeing where they are pressuring appointed U.S. attorneys, which is one of the most dangerous things they can do. You know, the U.S. attorney serves strictly at the pleasure of the president, so they can, in fact, the president can fire the person or ask that they leave. What we have not seen until we have really gotten into the Trump administration is a president so willing to take his hand and slam it down on one side of the scale and try to use a person's political position to threaten them that they will lose their job if they don't do his bidding against his political foes.
Trump 2.0 is not actually big on laws and stuff. He wants non-enforcement of laws and things like crypto and the Epstein list. And he wants allies that are going to enforce his illegal orders. Things like ICE grabbing people off the streets or using emergency powers for non-emergencies, ordering the National Guard into cities that don't want them, imposing tariffs that are supposed to be controlled by Congress, and shooting boats off the coast of Venezuela. And that's the thing about Trump. He doesn't forget a slight or an insult. So he goes after the scalps that he wants. He wants James Comey for investigating him on Russian interference in the 2016 election. He wants Letitia James for getting him indicted for fraud in New York City. He wants Adam Schiff for impeaching him and actually pulling off a trifecta. First, investigating him for 2016 Russian interference, being the lead manager of his first impeachment, and then being a member of the House committee that investigated January 6th and ultimately collectively laid blame for the riot exactly where it belonged, with Donald Trump. He's even going after James Bolton, who served as his national security advisor back during Trump 1.0. Bolton wrote a book that cast Trump in a bad light, portraying him as being uninformed, erratic, and self-serving. Trump got pissed, but I mean, honestly, show me the lie. So Trump starts screaming for heads and applying pressure. He wanted to escalate. His hatchet woman, Carolyn Levitt, said Trump was rightfully frustrated against those who weaponized him. She said, and I quote, "It was Joe Biden and his attorney general who weaponized the DOJ," end quote. Now, Trump was initially satisfied with small victories. Some of his appointees began to get dismissals of high-profile matters like Eric Adams and his bribery case, where they overruled local prosecutors. Pam Bondi even personally intervened in a case in Utah, ordering local prosecutors to drop the charges against a doctor. So this guy, Michael Kirk Moore, was on trial involving claims of more than $28,000 in fake COVID-19 vaccinations that were destroyed as part of a scheme involving the issuance of these fake cards. And Bondi announced on X that she was ordering the charges against Moore dismissed, writing that the doctor gave his patients a choice when the federal government refused to do so. I mean, basically just a layer of bullshit co-signing this guy's fraud, which is exactly what the Department of Justice is not supposed to do, but it's become common in Trump 2.0. But Trump began to get frustrated going after these guppies. He wanted the bigger fish, and he got pissed when his handpicked U.S. attorney in Virginia refused to indict.
Breaking news tonight, the U.S. attorney under heavy pressure from President Trump to charge a New York State official the president considers a political enemy is stepping down. Earlier today, the president said he wanted to get rid of Eric Siebert, head of the Eastern District of Virginia. The president has been demanding that he charge New York Attorney General Letitia James with mortgage fraud. Siebert's office does not have enough evidence, they say, to bring an indictment.
And he also raised concerns about the case against James Comey. Attorney General Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, number 1 and number 2 in the Justice Department, privately defended Siebert against other officials. Blanche, like Siebert, questioned the legal viability of bringing charges against James and Comey.
I mean, what was Siebert supposed to do? Prosecute a case without enough evidence? I mean, I would think that would just waste time and money and probably annoy a federal judge.
He really did the noble thing as a prosecutor, and that he was true to his oath both as a lawyer and as a prosecutor. And that is that you seek the truth and you seek justice, and you don't, show favor or affection one way or another. You certainly are not a lackey of a president, and you are to exercise some independent judgment. There's an old case that all the U.S. attorneys are familiar with that talks about our job is not to get convictions, but it's to seek the truth and it's to seek the right thing. And so if he didn't have enough evidence, then he was bound by his oath as a lawyer and certainly the oath he took as U.S. attorney to step back from that case and not just move forward as a way to save his job.
He was a career prosecutor. He was nominated U.S. attorney by President Trump. If career prosecutors can't do their jobs without political interference, whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, what happens to the system of justice?
The DOJ just becomes sort of the loaded gun for the White House, and that's not what you want. When we were sworn in one of the first meetings I had with President Obama, he came out and said, look, you're not my lawyers. You're the lawyers for the American people, for the country. You're not here to do my bidding. I may have priorities in my administration, but you do them in a way that complies with the law. That's never been the case with Trump. He thinks that everybody that comes in takes a loyalty oath and that they need to be simply at his beck and call to do whatever he wants, whether it be within the confines of their oath or the Constitution or outside of that. And that's a dangerous place to be if you've got people who wield so much power in the federal criminal justice system that they can come in and indict somebody simply because the person who appointed them says this is the only way you can keep your job. No matter what the evidence may show, if you don't do this, you're gonna lose your job, and that's a dangerous place. We've been teetering sort of along the edge of this thing for months now. I think that you'll start to see people take these as real warning signs, whether it's the First Amendment, whether it's DOJ pressure, whatever it may be, that we're getting mighty close to a place where we're going to have somebody step in.
He started to complain publicly that Pam Bondi wasn't doing enough to bring in charges. He wrote on Truth Social, "We cannot delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility." Pam, the president, wrote, "I have reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done." Trump also added, "They've impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now." So Trump wants to attack, but he needs ammo. And he gets it from a weird place. See, around 6 years ago, this guy named Bill Pulte donated over $1 million to Trump's political efforts. Pulte had a big social media following. He was very loyal to Trump, posting on X that President Trump is the greatest. Now, of course, that makes him qualified. So he was nominated for the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who oversees government mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The Campaign Legal Center's director of federal campaign reform, started to raise questions about this guy. Why is Bill Pulte even in a government position, he asked. Maybe he's qualified, maybe he isn't. But he did pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into Trump's super PAC. He included, and I think it's clear that there are these types of rewards for big donors across the Trump administration. Now, when Pulte was nominated as the country's top housing regulator, he told senators that his number one mission will be to strengthen and safeguard the housing finance system. But when he started the job, he instead focused on clawing his way into Trump's inner circle by targeting Trump's political enemies. He even injected himself into the Siebert decision, saying that Siebert could be doing more. Now you may ask yourself, who the fuck is Bill Pulte, and why would anyone care what he thinks about who should be a U.S. attorney? And that's a great question. It shouldn't matter what Pulte thinks, but he weaseled his way into Trump's inner circle. Pulte began his weaseling career by becoming one of the loudest voices inside the Trump administration when Trump was calling for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to resign. Trump was fuming over Powell's decision not to lower interest rates.
Jerome Powell has done a terrible job, and frankly, I don't think he could do a worse job.
We have a stupid person, frankly, at the Fed. He's an average mentally person. I'd say low in terms of what he does, low IQ for what he does, okay?
Numbskull. He's a numbskull. I think he's a total stiff. You talk to the guy, it's like talking to nothing. It's like talking to a chair. No personality.
During this time, Pulte waged an aggressive, multifaceted campaign on social media and cable television against the Fed chair. Pulte's relentless attacks against Powell helped him gain influence with Trump that far surpasses his role as a mortgage regulator.
We all know what's going on. I mean, we all know what's going on with Jay Powell.
What is going on with Jay Powell? Just so because I don't think
Jay Powell doesn't like our president.
Pulte even fueled a rumor campaign that Powell might resign. He issued a statement on agency letterhead citing reports that Jerome Powell is considering resigning when no such reports actually existed. He then proceeded to cite his own fake reports in another statement 2 days later, saying he was encouraged by reports of a possible resignation. Again, there are no reports. This is Pulte just making up bullshit. In one of his more dramatic moves against Powell, Pulte drafted a termination letter that Trump was waving around in front of a group of House Republicans during an Oval Office meeting. And Trump's cheered on Pulte, saying on Truth Media, "Keep moving forward, William. Don't let the radical left weaklings stop you." It got so bad that Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, the top Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee, had to send a letter to Pulte where she criticized him for becoming distracted from your statutory mission and focusing instead on Powell's firing. She noted that he had posted more than 100 times about Powell since the beginning of July. She said, "Your prolific activity on X, an apparent decision to take away time from your duties as FHFA director to draft a letter for President Trump to fire Chair Powell are abnormal." She continued, "Your behavior raises significant questions about your judgment and commitment to operating the FHFA in a responsible, competent, and lawful manner." When the bogus Jerome Powell resignation campaign didn't work, Pulte turned his sights on another member of the Fed, Lisa Cook.
Well, Ms. Cook is the one who filled out the applications, not me and not anybody else that I know. So she needs to account for why did she take these two mortgages out. It's awfully weird that she potentially saved a lot of money by making so-called clerical errors, which were not clerical errors. Why would somebody who's Jerome Powell not come out and say, you know what, if Ms. Cook did this, she should resign? So it's becoming more and more concerning by the day.
It didn't take Trump long to pounce.
Donald Trump just tried to fire Lisa Cook, who is the first Black woman to serve on the Federal Reserve Board, quote, effective immediately. In the face of baseless allegations made by the Trump administration, Cook said last week that she had no intention of being bullied and pledged to gather accurate information to answer any legitimate questions and provide the facts. Let's be very clear. Since Donald Trump came back into office, he has tried any way he can to chip away at the Federal Reserve's independence. And this has truly been in an attempt to get to the rock bottom interest rates that he really desires to have, apparently by any means necessary.
even the conservative Wall Street Journal's editorial board warned that Pulte's actions to go after Trump's enemies were, in a quote, an ominous turn in political warfare. Blasting weighty allegations via social media or leaks is an ugly way for government regulators to behave. Pulte wasn't done. Since Trump was patting him on the head, he got excited. He sent 3 criminal referrals for alleged mortgage fraud to the Justice Department. In addition to Lisa Cook, he also went after Adam Schiff and Letitia James, who both denied wrongdoing and called the moves politically motivated. But Pulte smelled blood, and he went on TV touting to Fox about how much attention the allegations were receiving. For the sake of the country, I think she should resign, he told CNBC. I'll tell you this right now, this is the most viral story in the country. Now, that's actually a sad indictment of the state of law in our country. People have equated attention with truth. But just because something gets a lot of attention doesn't make it true. Just because something is viral doesn't mean it's accurate. He went back on CNBC and said, the Lisa Cook allegations came across our desk and it's my duty to report it. It wouldn't matter if she were a Republican or a Democrat. It is what it is. Unfortunately, that was quickly revealed to be bullshit.
Relatives of the Trump administration official who has accused Fed Governor Lisa Cook of mortgage fraud have reportedly themselves listed 2 properties in separate states as their primary residence. Reuters says that Mark and Julie Pulte, who are the father and stepmother of Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte, have claimed housing exemptions for homes in Michigan and Florida since 2020. That could save them thousands of dollars a year. Last week, ProPublica reported that at least 3 of the president's cabinet members call multiple homes their primary residences on mortgages.
So while Pulte sent referrals for Schiff, James, and Cook, he was not interested in taking any steps against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who claimed 3 primary residences on mortgage applications, which Letitia James's attorney claimed in a letter was evidence that the investigations were politically motivated. So again, if this didn't matter who it was, he'd be reporting all of these folks and not being selective about who committed mortgage fraud and who didn't. The reality is that mortgage fraud is incredibly difficult to prosecute, so it's rarely done. You have to prove ill intent, and that's a very high bar.
And what we're learning is that the career prosecutors involved in this matter just do not believe there's sufficient evidence to bring charges. And people should remember that, it's not a crime if you make a mistake on a mortgage application. The crime would be knowingly, misstating facts in order to get a more advantageous interest rate, for example. And that's what her critics have accused her of. And she denies that and says it was a mistake. And they would need evidence to show that it wasn't a mistake. And the prosecutors are saying that this is not a strong case. They don't believe they can win it, so they're declining to bring it. If this happens, Katie, this will be a new thing that we have not seen, a Rubicon really crossed for the Trump administration.
Why is Bill Pulte pulling mortgage documents? Investigations into mortgage fraud are usually handled by the Federal Housing Finance Agency's Office of Inspector General. They're a watchdog group. They're staffed with lawyers and agents who actually have expertise in investigating crimes, including mortgage fraud. The OIG is the office that typically makes a criminal referral. And former members of this group are starting to ring the alarm. Janelle Bird Chichester stated, it's very bizarre for Pulte to be the one making a criminal referral himself and it not coming from the IG's office. She continued, if we thought there might be criminal activity, that would go to the IG for review and a determination. Then the IG would be making a referral, not the agency. Other former officials across the Inspector General's office and FHFA agreed that Pulte's involvement was unusual. The executive chair of Inside Mortgage Finance, a research firm that's covered the mortgage market for more than 4 decades, stated, it's certainly unusual, if not unprecedented, for the director of FHFA to make a single request to the Justice Department that someone should be investigated for mortgage fraud. Historically, we haven't seen a lot of people prosecuted for mortgage fraud in terms of misrepresenting their occupancy on a house. And this is where things get weird because Cook's loan file wasn't caught in some kind of routine audit. Adam Levitin, a law professor at Georgetown University, wrote a post on the blog Credit Slips No one ever goes back and examines loan applications on performing loans for occupancy fraud. That would entail expenses for no benefit. And again, the Inspector General's office would typically only pursue cases that resulted in substantial losses. Levitin continues. Instead, the only way anyone would have noticed a problem with Cook's loan application is that Pulte, as head of FHFA, directed Fannie or Freddie to pull her application. That is unheard of, end quote. Trump is just finding shit he could throw against the wall and hoping for the best, but he needs people to prosecute these sham cases. Now, he's got people like Ed Martin, the nut job we talked about in part 1 of this series, but he's kind of a shitty lawyer, so not really. And after Trump fired Siebert, he couldn't find a career U.S. attorney who was willing to take the cases because nobody wanted to napalm their career and then have to deal with Trump's snout looking over their shoulder every day. And Trump even posted on Truth Social after Siebert resigned, he even lied to the media and said he quit and that we had no case. I fired him. And there is a great case, and many lawyers and legal pundits say so. And of course, Trump's full of shit because he never names who these people are. It's always they and them, and everybody agrees. This is just stuff that's happening in his demented head. So Trump had to go outside the box to find a prosecutor.
This morning, sources tell ABC News the Justice Department is preparing to ask a grand jury to indict former FBI Director James Comey on allegations he lied to Congress. It comes after the president publicly pressured Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute those who he sees as his political enemies. On social media, Trump called Comey, quote, guilty as hell, adding, nothing is being done and we can't delay any longer.
We have to act fast. If they're not guilty, that's fine. If they are guilty or if they should be charged, they should be charged. And we have to do it now.
Now, the president ordering Bondi to install one of his former personal lawyers, Lindsay Halligan, as the new U.S. Attorney for Eastern Virginia, the same office that had been investigating Comey for 3 months. When Halligan reported to work this week, sources tell ABC News prosecutors presented her with a memo recommending that Comey not be charged with a crime, saying there was not enough evidence. Sources tell us Halligan is poised to ignore that recommendation and try to seek an indictment anyway.
Now, even though prosecutors say they don't have a case against Comey, Trump seems to have found a loophole. Appoint a prosecutor who doesn't care.
Sources say the president forced out his own appointed U.S. attorney for Eastern Virginia, replacing him with one of his personal lawyers, Lindsay Halligan.
Wow. One of his personal lawyers. She must have a ton of experience in the criminal justice system. And she knows her way around a grand jury.
Halligan, an insurance lawyer, has never prosecuted a criminal case in her career or presented evidence to a grand jury.
Okay. This sounds bad, but at least she is a lawyer. I mean, in this administration, that's well above the baseline. There was a really good chance he could have appointed the Jizz brothers for this job. But you got to figure, if he's trusting Lindsay Halligan to go after his political enemies, the vetting process must have been extremely thorough.
She told the Washington Post that she ended up on Trump's legal team after showing up at one of his golf events in a suit, prompting Trump to hire her just weeks later.
This is how he picks members of his team. The lady in the suit, come join my legal team.
And enter Lindsay Halligan as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Trump brought her in and put on social media she needed to get things moving and deliver justice for all. Trump said he expected her to do great things for justice. Again, Halligan's an insurance lawyer. She became a special assistant to Trump, taking on some of his goofy projects around wokeism, such as reviewing federal museums for improper ideology, whatever that means. But she performed in the only court that Trump actually cares about, the court of public opinion. She defended him on Fox News, Newsmax, and Bill O'Reilly's show. So we wound up with a lawyer with no prosecutorial experience and who was the most junior lawyer on Trump's personal legal team to become the head of one of the most sensitive posts at the Justice Department and overseeing around 300 lawyers and staff. Important cases because the Pentagon and CIA are nearby. So they handle important and sensitive national security cases. So let's talk about the difference in the quality of lawyer here, right? Siebert, the real lawyer that she replaced, was the attorney on 6 175 federal cases. Lindsay Halligan worked on 3. And in all 3 of those, she was one of Trump's personal lawyers. Stacey Young, who's the executive director and founder of Justice Connection, a support network for traumatized DOJ alumni, told Democracy Docket, I don't think Siebert will be the last one to be fired. I don't think this seemingly unqualified nominee is going to be the last unqualified nominee we'll see. She continued, and I'm worried how far this is going to go. Every prosecutor in the DOJ now understands that if there's a case where they don't think they have enough evidence to convict one of the president's enemies, they'll probably be fired too.
We saw that they ordered charges dropped against the New York mayor for what many people saw as political reasons. A judge called it a political bargain. But we have not seen charges ordered to be brought over the objection of career prosecutors. That is really astounding and would be, some people would see that as an incredible abuse of power. U.S. attorneys are normally given a lot of latitude. They are presidentially appointed, and they get to normally make the calls on their own cases. And in this case, that seems not to be happening.
Sham prosecutor Halligan starts to put in her sham indictments. She goes after Letitia James, and she goes after Comey. James has been under threat ever since Trump came back to the White House. In the spring, his allies found some documents related to a house she had purchased in Virginia with her niece, and they thought they had struck gold. On the document, she had said that she planned to live in the house as a primary residence, an assertion that's contradicted by other documents associated with the house. So Pulte used this to send a criminal referral to the Justice Department and accused her of having committed mortgage fraud. But again, if you look at the full documents, that's not the only piece of paper in this file. It's noted that Ms. James' exchanges with the lender showed her clearly communicating that she did not plan to live in the house. And there was no indication that the single document on which they're trying to build a case was taken into account when confirming the transaction. Her niece, her accountant, and others involved in the transaction testified to this before a grand jury over the summer.
This is nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system. He is forcing federal law enforcement agencies to do his bidding, all because I did my job as the New York State Attorney General. These charges are baseless, and the president's own public statements make clear that his only goal is political retribution at any cost. The president's actions are a grave violation of our constitutional order and have drawn sharp criticism from members of both parties. His decision to fire a United States attorney who refused to bring charges against me and replace them with someone who is blindly loyal not to the law, but to the president is antithetical to the bedrock principles of our country. This is the time for leaders on both sides of the aisle to speak out against this blatant perversion of our system of justice. I stand strongly behind my office's litigation against the Trump Organization. We conducted a 2-year investigation based on the facts and evidence, not politics. Judges have upheld the trial court's finding that Donald Trump, his company, and his 2 sons are liable for fraud. I'm a proud woman of faith, and I know that faith and fear cannot share the same space. And so today, I'm not fearful, I'm fearless. And as my faith teaches me, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. We will fight these baseless charges aggressively, and my office will continue to fiercely protect New Yorkers and their rights. And I will continue to do my job.
But crazy Ed Martin decided to hell with all this legal stuff and instead chose to stake out her house while wearing a trench coat. Can you imagine that, looking outside your house and just seeing this crazy fuck standing there staring at your house in a trench coat? Now, Pulte's referrals are not compelling, at least based on the information that's available. For starters, the DOJ doesn't go rooting around specific people's home mortgage applications in the hope of finding discrepancies that they can characterize as federal criminal fraud. It's almost certain that Pulte had to use the power of his office to pursue this in a way that helps Trump, which is an insane development. But it's one thing for a federal official like Pulte to run around making accusations on social media, and it's something else entirely for prosecutors to develop a credible and legally sound fraud case that will persuade a jury at a trial. Federal law requires prosecutors to show both that the misstatements at issue were material and that the defendants made them with the intent to defraud. These are hard things to do. So according to Trump, as he told reporters, she's very guilty of something. He also wants John Brennan, the former CIA director. Again, he's going to go after Adam Schiff. He even wants to go after the Open Society Foundations. This is a group led by George Soros, the billionaire Democratic donor who has long been on Trump's shit list. Trump's been pushing for U.S. attorneys' offices to investigate Soros in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, as part of a broader promise to crack down on liberal and progressive groups. Trump even posted on social media that Soros and his son should, quote, be charged with RICO because of their support of violent protest, and much more all throughout the United States of America, end quote. A conspiracy charge based on a bullshit fantasy Trump has about Antifa being some sort of an organized group, which they're not and never have been. Trump likes to think that Antifa just has, local branches where people wander in to create anarchy against the U.S. government. Batshit as hell. But of course, as Trump began to normalize all these crazy behaviors, it just got worse and worse. Members of the Department of Justice started to ignore the orders of federal judges. Bondi and Trump have even stepped up attacks on judges who have rebuked Justice Department lawyers for presenting arguments in court that were specious or failed to respond to judges' inquiries. Several of which, of course, involve the administration's hardline anti-immigrant actions.
Today, a Department of Justice lawyer argued before a 3-judge appeals court that a federal judge's order blocking Trump's deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members without due process was usurping the president's power. It didn't sound like the lawyer was at all that convincing to at least one judge on the panel.
There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here. If the government says we don't have to give process for that, then y'all could have put me up on Saturday and thrown me on a plane, thinking I'm a member of Nicaragua and giving me no chance to protest it. If your argument is we didn't have to do that, it's an intrusion on the president's war powers, the courts are paralyzed to do anything, then that's a misreading of precedent. It's a misreading of the text of the Alien Enemies Act. And that can't be an unlawful intrusion on the president's powers. It just can't. The president has to comply with the Constitution and laws like everybody else.
Ex-federal judge John Jones, who was president of Dickinson College, said, there are certain things lawyers should avoid doing because they are sure to pique the ire of federal judges. These include patronizing, temporizing, lying, and making baseless arguments. The Trump DOJ lawyers have hit them all before multiple judges.
Tom Nichols, a writer for The Atlantic, writes that Donald Trump's assault on the judiciary is already the most, what he says, hostile and sustained political attack on America's law enforcement and legal institutions since the Civil War.
It's worse than what we've seen from authoritarians like the leaders in Poland and Turkey, because at least what they tried to do was to pack the courts. They fired judges, or they tried to put their own judges on. What the Trump administration is saying is we don't have to listen to judges. Judges can't tell us what to do. And the reason they're doing this, Simone, is because the main resistance right now is coming from federal courts. 140 different lawsuits, 40 different injunctions, which means 40 times in just 2 months. The Trump administration has been told, you can't do that. You can't tell Congress you can't spend money that's already been appropriated. You can't close down departments, and you can't send people to notorious foreign prisons without a day in court.
Trump's DOJ has opened formal complaints against judges it disagrees with, has even sued the entire federal bench in Maryland. And then there are direct misconduct complaints that they're filing against judges that they disagree with, including James Boasberg, who ruled against Trump's deportation plans, and Bove directed DOJ lawyers to lie, right? Get those planes off the ground. It's gotten so bad now that federal judges are breaking the fourth wall and directly telling Americans to keep the faith.
2 weeks ago, Judge Susan Graber of the Ninth Circuit did something that federal judges almost never do. She addressed the American public directly. Above all, I ask those who are watching this case unfold to retain faith in our judicial system for just a little longer, end quote. A federal judge breaking the fourth wall is a distress signal. It reflects how worried some judges are about Americans losing confidence in their courts at a time when the rule of law is under sustained pressure. Judge Graber's words were a plea to Americans to hold on to one of the few institutions that are still standing between democracy and its descent into authoritarianism. Her warning came in a dissent in the Portland Emergency Powers case, a case that would determine whether a president may deploy federal troops onto American streets based on little more than a self-declared rebellion. As Judge Ludig notes in the same piece, the federal judiciary is under extraordinary pressure. It is now confronting a president who's actively trying to amass the powers of a king, who's given Americans ample reason to believe that he intends to defy the Constitution's two-term limit. Those Trump 2028 hats scattered around the Oval Office, they're not a joke. Notably, these lower court judges have assumed a responsibility that the Supreme Court has so far declined to take on, reasserting the judiciary's duty to check presidential overreach. In her dissent, Judge Graber suggested that her colleagues are, quote, abdicating our judicial responsibility by approving emergency powers where no emergency existed. She noted a core constitutional principle, quote, except in true emergencies and by design of the founders and Congress, our civil society resolves its disputes without domestic military intervention, end quote. Judge Graber is far from alone. Across the country, lower courts are pushing back, rejecting Donald Trump's unlawful power grabs. In the Portland case, District Court Judge Karen Immergut, a Trump appointee, wrote that the administration's claim of a rebellion to justify federalizing the National Guard was untethered to the facts, noting that while courts owe the executive significant deference, great deference is not equivalent to ignoring the facts on the ground. In the Illinois case, the Seventh Circuit affirmed that political opposition is not rebellion, explaining that rebellion requires deliberate, organized violence against the government and that peaceful protest does not meet that standard. That court also rejected the claim that a president is the sole judge of whether emergency conditions exist. Judges are also drawing the line against militarizing civilian life, warning that if Trump's deployments are accepted, virtually any protest or dissent or anything he doesn't like, really, could be labeled rebellion and met with troops. Judges are standing up for state sovereignty, a principle that Republicans once deeply championed before aligning themselves with Trump. These rulings reiterate that federal intervention requires lawful conditions, not political motives. Judges are resisting the shadow docket as a vehicle for autocratic change. They're calling out the misuse of emergency appeals to the Supreme Court to enact sweeping legal transformations without full judicial scrutiny. Judges are accustomed to operating under the radar, but more and more, many of them are breaking with that tradition because they see the Democratic backsliding. They're trying to warn their colleagues and the country. You can see in these rulings that lower court judges are writing not just for the lawyers in the room or the parties to the cases, but for the American public. They're laying out the stakes for our democracy in plain language. Which brings me to an important point. Something profound is happening in the lower courts that can be easy to overlook. In this moment, with the rule of law under severe strain, many judges are finding their role naturally expanding. They're not just interpreting statutes and issuing orders. They've become the last line of defense for factual truth in a political environment where mass distortion has become a central tool of power. And since Trump returned to office, courts across the country have been doing something that used to be extraordinarily rare. They're telling the United States government in plain terms, we don't believe you. We don't trust you. You are not all-powerful. And establishing that record matters because there is a coordinated effort underway by the Trump administration to purge inconvenient facts from the American story, including the truth about the 2020 election and about January 6th. This administration is not only testing constitutional boundaries, it desperately wants to control and revise the historical record itself. This week, 2 federal prosecutors were suspended for accurately describing January 6th as a riot and noting Trump's role in it. The truth undermines the original big lie, the myth of a stolen election. So the truth is punished. This campaign to rewrite the historical record extends to America's cultural institutions and even to the White House itself. Directives to the Smithsonian to alter exhibits, the symbolic demolition of parts of the White House to build a gilded ballroom. These are not cosmetic changes. They are, in fact, efforts to overwrite American history, to substitute it with one man's preferred narrative. As the scholar Jason Stanley put it, the message being sent to the American public is this: there is no history. I am the start of history. Understanding that this is a defining feature of authoritarian movements, the past must be rewritten, literally bulldozed, so that the leader becomes the source of the truth and of history. George Orwell once described the authoritarian project as the constant rewriting of history, day by day, almost minute by minute, so that any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment was allowed to remain on the record. That's why the work of the lower courts matters so much right now. Judges across the country are bearing witness at a critical moment in American history. What these judges are doing is part of the broader resistance to authoritarianism, a key component of defending democracy alongside the civic action that's happening on the ground. American judges create the official record, the legal, factual, historical account of what happened in a given moment. And that record is one of the last formal safeguards that we have against the rewriting of history, meant to outlast any single person or any single administration. Every dissent, every opinion, every factual finding is a shield against revisionism, a counter-narrative to propaganda. And Trump knows it. That's why he routinely and publicly insults and belittles judges. But according to Judge Ludig, despite the very real threats to their safety, the lower courts are determined to support and defend the Constitution according to their oath, and that's what they're going to do. And while the judges hold the line on their end, they ask that you not give up. Judge Graber asks that you hold on for just a little longer. Judge Ludig, who has himself faced threats to his life for advising former Vice President Mike Pence not to bend to Trump's pressure to overturn the results of the 2020 election, captures the deeper stakes for our country. Quote, there is a truth. There are facts. And it doesn't matter what anyone else says from MAGA, or frankly, what the President of the United States says. There is a thing called truth in this world. There always has been, and there always will be. The day that the federal courts of the United States of America attempt or acquiesce in the denial and the rewriting of truth is the day that America falls. End quote.
Judges have become the last line of defense in our democracy. And again, the more they get away with, the further they go. The DOJ now going after individuals. Chris Krebs, who was appointed by Trump in 2018 as the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, was fired by Trump in 2020 after he contradicted Trump's false claims of election fraud and debunking election-related conspiracy theories. And Trump referred to Krebs as a wise guy, a fraud, and a bad guy. He signed an executive order revoking Krebs' security clearance and directing both the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security to open investigations into him. As Trump signed the order, he said, so we'll find out whether or not it was a safe election. And if it wasn't, he's got a big price to pay. Krebs told the Wall Street Journal that Trump's actions amounted to the government pulling its levers to punish dissent. In response to all this, Krebs had to resign from his position with the cybersecurity firm SentinelOne to focus on defending himself from the investigation. I mean, just imagine you're going to court and hearing that the U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security is out to get you. How terrifying that must be. But Trump's DOJ wants to crack down on individuals so bad that they're going after everybody, no matter how goofy their circumstances.
Tonight, Sean Dunn accused of attacking a federal officer with a foot-long Subway sandwich, and it's all caught on camera.
You see these fascists right here?
Take a look at this cell phone video from late Sunday night. 37-year-old Sean Dunn, shown in the pink shirt and shorts, allegedly yelling at federal officers on 14th Street in D.C. Moments later, video appearing to show him crossing the street, screaming just inches from a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer's face, and then appearing to hit the officer in the chest with a foot-long Subway sandwich. Officers immediately chasing Dunn in the street.
They sent in 20 people to take down this guy in his studio apartment. And he had worked as a paralegal in the Justice Department at the time of the sandwich toss. And Attorney General Pam Bondi said on social media that he had been fired over the incident. And then she went further, right into cuckoo land. She branded him a deep state saboteur of the administration's agenda. The sandwich guy. This was the best a deep state can do, was throwing a sandwich at ICE. And the next day, on August 11th, Trump declared a crime emergency in the district the day after the sandwiching.
According to the criminal complaint, Dunn allegedly told police, "I did it. I threw a sandwich."
Judge Janine wanted blood.
And you might be saying, Judge Janine? Yeah, that Judge Janine. Another psycho who's now U.S. attorney.
He thought it was funny. Well, he doesn't think it's funny today because we charged him with a felony, assault on a police officer, and we're going to back the police to the hilt.
She actually sought to initially charge Dunn with felony assault of a federal agent, where he could have served up to 8 years. She wanted to toss him in the gulag.
Now, the trial of a man accused of throwing a sandwich at a Customs and Border Patrol agent is underway.
Sean Dunn told police he threw the sandwich to draw the agents away from their assignment.
This guy actually had to go through a trial. And by the way, he was acquitted because thankfully the whole nation is not high on MAGA Kool-Aid. But while this guy's going on trial, Trump pardoned his supporters who rioted against the Capitol on January 6th, including some captured on video hurtling explosives, beating officers with baseball bats and riot shields, and spraying chemical irritants. They're free to go, but Sandwich Guy, he's got to get locked away. And they kept going. They went after a YouTuber.
The immigration facility in Broadview, Illinois, is a particular flashpoint. The building was constructed to process detainees, not house them. But because of the massive uptick in deportations, coupled with the Trump administration's policy of locking up all immigrants without regard for whether they pose a danger to the community, that is no longer the case. Broadview's 3 holding cells are now being used to house hundreds of detainees for days and sometimes weeks on end. According to a lawsuit filed on October 30th, immigrants are forced to sleep on concrete floors next to overflowing toilets. They get no medical care, even if they're pregnant or elderly or sick. They are denied access to counsel, and they get just 3 bottles of water a day, causing pervasive dehydration. Clergy members hold regular vigils outside, demanding to be allowed to pray with the detainees. Kat Abu-Ghazaleh has been on the front lines of that confrontation, protesting at Broadview. On September 19, she was picked up and violently thrown to the ground during a peaceful protest. Conservative commentators like Laura Loomer posted that she loved watching communists get body slammed. Fox News' Laura Ingraham praised the agents on her show.
Thrown to the ground by an ICE agent. Good work.
And the Department of Homeland Security posted the video with the caption, "Individuals and groups impeding ICE operations are siding with vicious cartels, human traffickers, and violent criminals." But lots of residents of Chicago are opposed to ICE. They're not big on scenes of people getting tackled in the streets or their neighborhoods being tear gassed, and neither are cool. Multiple federal judges have issued orders barring the use of troops in military tactics in Chicago. Judge April Perry barred the federalization of the Illinois National Guard, finding that there was no emergency on the ground sufficient to justify it. Trump has spent years screaming that Chicago is the murder capital of the world, a killing field, a hellhole. On September 25th, Abu-Ghazaleh was part of a crowd that briefly blocked a vehicle outside the Broadview facility. They banged on the black SUV, chanted slogans, and threw stuffed animals before being dispersed with pepper balls. Abu-Ghazaleh was not arrested on that day, but on October 23rd, a special grand jury in Chicago indicted her along with 5 other co-defendants for conspiring to impede a federal agent in the conduct of his duties. The indictment alleges that the defendants conspired with one another and others known and unknown to surround a government vehicle outside the Broadview facility and banged aggressively on it to prevent Agent A from getting to work on time. They crowded together in the front and side of the government vehicle and pushed against it to hinder and impede its movement, scratched the body of the government vehicle, including etching a message into the body of the vehicle, specifically the word pig, broke one of the government vehicle's side mirrors, and broke a rear windshield wiper off the government vehicle. Note that it does not say any of the 5 individuals indicted did those things. That's the beauty of a conspiracy charge. Prosecutors can hold every member of the conspiracy criminally responsible for the whole thing. That Agent A was forced to drive at an extremely slow rate of speed to avoid injuring any of the co-conspirators, and in doing so, slowly progressed toward the BSSA to discharge the duties of his office. So TLDR, he had to drive slow. That's what happened. Agent A was a couple minutes late to work because it's illegal to run people over. That's it. Got it. And for this, she's charged with forcibly impeding and intimidating and interfering with an officer of the United States. And, by sheer coincidence, Abu Ghazaleh's alleged co-conspirators are also involved in Illinois politics. And from the videos, it certainly does appear that the feds specifically indicted the politicians in the crowd and left the other protesters alone. Representative Schakowsky called the indictments an alarming abuse of power and an attack on the very foundations of democracy by a wannabe dictator. And local politicians, including 6 of Abu Ghazaleh's primary opponents, put out a joint statement condemning the partisan and unethical indictments and saying this is what happens in dictatorships and failed states. Hopefully we'll find out more about the government's theory of the case, because a conspiracy requires an agreement between the parties plus an overt action taken to effect that conspiracy. The indictment states in conclusory fashion that such an agreement existed between the defendants and that they swarmed the car in support of it. Maybe that's how it went down, maybe it isn't, but the government has to prove the existence of that conspiracy to make the defendants jointly responsible for everything that happened. They want to indict Abu Ghazaleh not just for standing in front of the car, but for ripping off the wiper in the window and scratching Pig in the side, even if she didn't personally do any of those things. This distinction is very legally important. President Trump has made clear that he thinks protest is illegal. If not, the right to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances is explicitly protected by the First Amendment. But the Justice Department wants to make an end run around that by treating protest as a conspiracy, effectively punishing the entire assembly if one person breaks the law. So proving the existence of a conspiracy is key to securing a conviction. The defendants will certainly argue that there is no conspiracy, that they had no agreement, and they will certainly make a motion to dismiss for selective and vindictive prosecution, arguing that they were singled out for their speech and prosecuted where other similarly situated people were not.
This conspiracy charge can land her in jail for up to 5 years. And the DOJ now using conspiracy charges, slapping them against anybody who protests, is just a blatant attempt to break the back of protesting. We're going to charge everyone who was there with the same crimes, whether they did it themselves or not. Again, this is just a highway to hell. This is not America. And finally, the cherry on top of this shit Sunday. On October 21st, President Trump demanded that the Justice Department pay him compensation for federal investigations into his crimes.
Sources tell ABC News that President Trump is pushing for a personal $230 million payout from the Justice Department as compensation for the federal investigations he's faced.
Well, I guess they probably owe me a lot of money for that. Probably, yeah, that's true.
That money would ultimately come from American taxpayers. The president now in charge of the department that investigated him for allegations of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and mishandling of classified documents in 2022. Storing them in a ballroom, storage room, and even a bathroom. The president filed 2 claims against the DOJ when he left office, claiming his privacy rights were violated. Those investigations were approved by federal judges with no evidence of malicious prosecution. If the settlement goes through, the president would personally collect nearly $250 million from American taxpayers, an unprecedented personal compensation for the nation's commander-in-chief from the very people who helped elect him into office.
It's interesting because I'm the one that makes the decision, right? And, that decision would have to go across my desk. And it's awfully strange to make a decision where I'm paying myself. In other words, did you ever have one of those cases where you have to decide how much you're paying yourself in damages? But I was damaged very greatly, and any money that I would get, I would give to charity.
The Justice Department officials who would likely sign off on the payment were once President Trump's own personal lawyers, Attorney General Pam Bondi and her deputy Todd Blanche. All of it raising new ethics concerns. One ethics professor telling the New York Times the ethical conflict is just so basic and fundamental, you don't need a law professor to explain it. And Democrats calling the president's demand illegal.
It is definitively illegal. You can't simply transfer $230 million of taxpayer funds because Donald Trump has directed his sycophants within his administration to do just that.
$230 million. Oh yeah, he's going to send it to charity because the Trump family has such an amazing record with their charitable contribution.
The New York State Attorney General sued the Donald J. Trump Foundation, alleging persistently illegal conduct and mismanagement at the president's charity. What is it that the president and his 3 oldest children are accused of in this investigation?
What they're accused of basically is running a tax-exempt charitable foundation like a piggy bank. They're using it as just another checking account for Donald Trump to buy things for himself, to pay off the creditors of his business, and in 2016 to sort of act as a prop and to support his presidential campaign. They ran a charitable foundation. They were charged by law with safeguarding its assets, making sure they were spent for charitable purposes, and they often seem to have ignored those responsibilities and spent it on things that help themselves.
Today also marked an embarrassing and expensive end for President Trump to a lawsuit that was brought against him last year for what appears to have basically been a fake scam charity that he operated for decades. It was called the Donald J. Trump Foundation. It's no more. It was ostensibly a charity. Trump used the money from that so-called charity to pay for things like debts his businesses owed or illegally bolstering his presidential campaign and stuff like buying himself portraits of himself. When that lawsuit was filed by the New York Attorney General, President Trump declared publicly, quote, "I won't settle this case." Today, he settled this case. The judge in the case ordered him to pay $2 million to actual charities. He's also ordered to shut down his own fraudulent charity forever. And the president has to admit in writing to multiple instances in which the money for this charity was misused by him and his businesses. Now, this settlement today is not to be confused with the $25 million settlement the president had to pay for his Trump University thing being a scam. That multi-million-dollar fraud settlement is the one he made a couple of years ago as he was becoming president. I know it can be confusing, but this is actually a whole different multi-million-dollar settlement he's had to pay. Not about his Trump University being a fraud. That was the other settlement. This is about his Trump charity also being a fraud. But it can get confusing, all of the multi-million-dollar fraud settlements the president is paying to settle claims against all of the things he's put his name on over the years.
According to Justice Department regulations, the Deputy Attorney General, Blanche, is one of 2 people eligible to sign off on this kind of a settlement. The other guy, Stanley Woodward, is also a Trump lawyer. So we have 2 guys who owe their income to Trump as being authorized to sign off for the settlements. Trump is negotiating, in essence, with his subordinates, and any of them run the risk of being fired if they make a decision that doesn't please Trump. Now, of course, Trump and his White House completely deny it. A spokesperson stated, in any circumstance, all officials at the Department of Justice follow the guidance of career ethics officials. Sounds great, right? Except Pam Bondi fired the agency's top ethics advisor back in July. If they were to give Trump this money, we'd be in the dark, even though we're footing the bill. There's little information provided to the public when a settlement is reached. Details of administrative settlements are typically not disclosed to the public. They could pull this shit in the dark, and we would never know what the hell happened. So that's it, folks. The final dominoes falling to turn the Department of Justice from a venerable legal institution to a clown show. You've got sham indictments offered by hack prosecutors like Ed Martin and Lindsay Halligan against Trump's enemies and critics. You have the DOJ ignoring judges' orders. We have them going after Sandwich Guy and YouTube Girl. We have Trump trying to extract $230 million for inciting an insurrection. We have lower-level federal judges bravely being the last line of defense for American democracy. The sad reality, folks, is that right now, our country is a roaring dumpster fire. So thank you again for tuning in. That's all we've got for this week. If you want to help out the channel, please subscribe or follow us on your preferred podcasting platform. And tell your fellow disgusted Americans where they can find us to give us a listen. If you have a few minutes, please leave us a rating on your preferred podcasting platform so more folks can find the show. Appreciate you tuning in. Have a great night, folks.